Welcome everyone to Have History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and when we last left Thomas, he was preparing to leave the Northern Virginia-Maryland area for the Bluegrass State of Kentucky. Kentucky's declared neutrality was a delicate situation. Although Abraham Lincoln disagreed legally with Kentucky's right to remain neutral, his actions were that of someone respecting neutrality, at least somewhat. He did covertly supply Unionist Kentuckians with weapons and supplies. The state also allowed for the United States to set up recruitment camps. One of those was Camp Dick Robinson, established on the land of a pro-Union sympathizer. Thomas would take command of Camp Dick Robinson on September 12, 1861. His time as a trainer of soldiers at West Point had prepared him to train the new recruits that he would be coming into contact with at Camp Dick Robinson. When Leonidas Polk led a Confederate force to capture Columbus, Kentucky on September 4th, state officials were irate and asked them to leave, but Polk refused. As a result, Ulysses S. Grant crossed the Mississippi River and occupied Paducah, Kentucky, an action tolerated by Kentucky since the Confederacy was the aggressor in this case. On September 18th, the Kentucky legislature voted to side with the Union. When Thomas arrived at Camp Dick Robinson to take control of the troops he was to defend Kentucky with, he found 6 regiments in all, 3 infantry regiments and 1 cavalry regiment of Kentucky troops and 2 infantry regiments from East Tennessee, all untrained. One aspect of the task before him that he bemoaned to Sherman was that he didn't have trained subordinates to do the necessary paperwork or to help in the training. Thomas was having to train both officers and men in their respective jobs. Thomas was inundated with problems soon after reaching Kentucky. For one, a measles outbreak occurred and killed many of his men. He also had trouble with secessionists threatening to rise up in his sector. A group of secessionists put an ad in a newspaper to meet at the fairgrounds in Lexington, Kentucky for a camp drill. However, they did not say they were secessionists. Thomas sniffed out their plan to form a pro-secession militia and take over the arsenals in northern Kentucky, so he sent some of his troops to that city with orders to arrest the perpetrators. The secessionists called off their assembly when the federal troops arrived. Even though he had only been in command of the camp for about a month, Thomas was drawing up plans for an invasion of East Tennessee to sever the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad that ran from Knoxville, Tennessee to Richmond, Virginia. It was a bold plan, but about this same time, Thomas received a notice that General Ormsby Mitchell would be taking command of his troops and leading that invasion. Thomas was angry that his command was being taken away for no reason. Sherman, now the commander of forces in Kentucky, sent Thomas a message to move against the Confederates in southeastern Kentucky without waiting for Mitchell. This was Sherman's way of helping his friend. If Sherman could say that Thomas was already on campaign toward East Tennessee, then he could be justified in keeping Thomas in command of those troops. Although Sherman attempted to keep Thomas in command, it was a visit by the Secretary of War Simon Cameron that preserved Thomas's assignment. Cameron inspected the troops in Kentucky, partly to investigate why they hadn't launched any offensives. He found that they lacked ammunition, weapons, and supplies, so Mitchell was ordered to stay in command of Indiana and Ohio, gathering supplies to be sent into Kentucky. This left Thomas with his command. This visit by Cameron resulted in Thomas getting 10 more regiments, which he divided them and his others into 4 brigades and identified them as the 1st Division of the Army of the Ohio. He also received a great subordinate, Albin Schopf. Schopf was a Polish-born officer who had served in the Hungarian Revolution and was an instructor of artillery for the Ottoman Empire. He came to the United States, and shortly after the Civil War broke out, his military experience landed him a field command. Thomas sent Schopf and about 5,000 men into southeastern Kentucky to combat the forces of Felix Zollicoffer. The two forces met at the Battle of Camp Wildcat, where Schopf was able to defend his position against Zollicoffer and send them back to Cumberland Gap. Thomas was delighted with the victory and visited the area and moved his headquarters to Crab Orchard, closer to Schopf's position. Thomas was still planning on an East Tennessee invasion. In early November 1861, a plan had been concocted between East Tennessee Unionists and the Union Army that on the night of November 8th, Unionists would burn the railroad bridges of the East Tennessee-Virginia Railroad so that Sherman's force in Kentucky could invade the region without worrying about Confederate troops being sent by rail to the region's aid. Some of the railroad bridges were burnt, but no army came. Sherman was convinced that the Confederacy was invading Kentucky, so he ordered Thomas and others to pull back their forces from their advanced positions. This decision received harsh criticism, and the backlash was felt by all of the commanders under Sherman, even Thomas, who was ready to start the invasion of East Tennessee. East Tennessean and politician Andrew Johnson came into Thomas's camp and openly criticized the decision. This began an argument between Alvin Schaff and the U.S. Senator, where Schaff threatened to expel Johnson from the camp. Thomas, without saying a word, came out of his headquarters, walked through the crowd, took Schaff by the arm, and led him back to the headquarters. Thomas stayed on good terms with Johnson despite the criticism. Don Carlos Buell would replace Sherman, and this replacement would suspend Thomas's plan to invade East Tennessee. However, it was just a matter of weeks until Confederate General Felix Zollicoffer invaded Kentucky for the second time and set up camp near Mill Springs, Kentucky. The Confederate commander had crossed the Cumberland River, and the heavy rains had prevented him from retreating. Buell sent Thomas to confront him, but the heavy rains also slowed down Thomas's advance. It took 16 days to march 64 miles, owing to the swollen creeks and streams and the thick mud that trapped the wagon's wheels and the men's shoes. Zollicoffer took the initiative against Thomas, approaching the troops and attacked the Union forces on January 19th. The mostly inexperienced troops got their first taste of battle at Mill Springs, and Thomas operated as an independent commander for the first time during the Civil War. The organizing of his troops and their placement allowed for Thomas to concentrate his troops' fire against the enemy. Many of the Confederate units used outdated flintlock muskets that misfired in the damp weather. The aggressive tactics of the rebels resulted in high casualties, and the fact that one of their leaders, Felix Zollicoffer, was killed after mistakenly entering Union lines only added to the confusion of battle and the defeat of the Confederate forces. Thomas pressed on to the Cumberland River, trapping the Confederate force between his army and the river. He planned to attack their camp the next day, but when his men advanced, they found no soldiers, but tons of supplies and even regimental colors. The rebels had ferried across the river during the night in a panic and had left their artillery and around 150 wagons of supplies. The Battle of Mill Springs had been a great victory for Thomas, but he hadn't followed up on his success. Thomas knew that he had committed a blunder. Colonel Speed Fry of the 4th Kentucky Infantry asked Thomas on January 20th why he hadn't demanded a surrender of the Confederate camp. Thomas thought for a moment and then replied, "Hang it, Fry, I never once thought of it." The general had a lot to be proud of, though. He had prepared his men well, and he had inspired his men to greatness. During the morning of the 19th, he put on a brand new brigadier general's uniform for the first time, and while the battle raged around him, he remained calm and in the saddle, so that his men could see that he was exposing himself to danger, just like he had asked them to do. Thomas also was able to place his troops effectively, and despite being about equal in number, he gave the impression that he had the Confederates outnumbered. A fun story emerged from the battle when a Confederate prisoner was allowed to meander through the Union camp. The Union soldiers asked him why the rebels ran in such panic, throwing away their rifles, packs, and rations. The prisoner stated, "Well, we were doing pretty good fighting, till old man Thomas rose up in his stirrups, and we heard him holler out, 'Attention creation, by kingdom's right wheel,' and then we knew you had us, and it was no time to carry weight." The brief encounter with the mountainous terrain deterred Thomas from wanting to invade East Tennessee. Now, Thomas asked to be a part of Buell's advances toward Middle Tennessee, and he would get his wish.